Hi everyone and welcome to today's video where we're going to be looking at literary genre in a doll's house by Henrik Ibsen. Okay, as you know, literary genre involves the techniques employed by the writer or the playwright in this case in order to create a compelling story. So we're just going to look at the overview of today's video, which is we're going to be looking at the title, the point of view, the plot narrative pattern, the creation of characters, and imagery and symbolism. Okay, so we're going to begin with the title. The title of this play is probably the most important of all three texts that we have studied. Okay, so the title, as we know, is A Doll's House. So the title of the play is an indication that the main character may be suppressed in some way, but because we associate a doll's house that children play with as an idealized vision of life. Okay, so if we think about a doll's house and kids all over the world play with a doll house, the owner of the house has full control over the inhabitants. Okay, they decide what they wear, how they act, how they behave. Okay, so if you think about it, Torvald owns the dollhouse. Nora happens to live in the dollhouse. Okay, so the owner of a dollhouse, which in this case is Torvald, controls what happens in the house, and while the doll may live in the house, she has no control over what happens. And you see this at the very beginning of the play when the way Torvald speaks to Nora, he belittles her at every opportunity. He calls her his little squirrel. Little is used repetitively throughout the play. He also scolds her for eating macaroons and the way she performs the tarantella. Everything is designed as a performance. Okay, we see this clearly at the beginning when Torvald scolds Nora for eating macaroons, and by the end of the play, Nora stands up and says, "Our home has been nothing but a playroom. I have been your doll wife." Okay, so doll wife, she's finally acknowledged that is what she has been throughout her life. She tells us that she was a doll child to her father and now a doll wife. Okay, so the doll's house is really important. Now, the word house is also important. It doesn't say doll home, it says doll house. House is quite a cold term for the place that you live. Most people would say the family home, and what shows there wasn't a home in the real sense of the word. Okay, the title is significant in giving us an insight into the theme of the play. So when you heard the word a doll's house, the phrase a doll's house, you were automatically given an idea that perhaps something wasn't right in the life of one of the characters. Okay, so moving on to point of view. So just like a doll's house is very like Brooklyn in that it is written as a third person narrative, but follows the life of the central character, Nora. It is a limited third-person narrative, as Nora is rarely offstage. If you get a third-person narrative in a novel, it is very, very different to a third-person narrative in a film or a play, because a third-person narrative in a novel can usually tell the stories of many different people, and it can give an insight into what's going on in their mind. That can't really happen in the film and the play. We talked earlier in the week about Brooklyn, how we got an insight into into Eilish's mindset through the use of her letters to Rose. We don't have that with A Doll's House, but there are devices employed by the playwright in order to give Nora's backstory and to give her opinions of what's going on in her head. So just like Eilish in Brooklyn, we are inclined to empathise with Nora as we observe the actions of the play. Also, we are not privy to her inner thoughts throughout the play. So as we go through, generally the central character in the text, we're inclined to empathise with him. If you think about Gatsby, Nora and Eilish, we generally want them to do well. They're the protagonists that we want to succeed. They don't all succeed, some don't. In this text, it's up to yourself. Does Nora succeed or has she failed? That's up to you. In a brief monologue after Torvald lectures her on how lying poisons everyone around, Nora cries out in terror, No, it isn't true. It's impossible. It must be impossible. Here we see the fear that Nora has that her lying has corrupted her children. Also shows how much she thinks of her children at this point. A lot of people would suggest that the children don't mean a lot to her, as evidenced by her leaving at the very end. But at this point, we see that she does want her children. She does want the best for her children. Okay, so we're just going to continue with that. We're going to plot narrative pattern. There's very little action in the play. with the key conflict occurring earlier with the illegal loan acquired by Nora. Yeah, in most plays, the key conflict usually happens within the play, but in this case, the conflict happened prior to the beginning of the play. So it's very different to Brooklyn, which we discussed, was told in a linear chronological order, and Gatsby, which it's probably more like Gatsby because a lot of the events in Gatsby happened prior to Nick arriving in West Egg. So in this case, the main thing happened before the play, and the first act brings together the various elements of the plot. We find out about the loan, Mrs. Lind arrives looking for a job, Krogstad threatens Nora, and Torvald sacks Krogstad. All of these things have a consequence for something else, okay? So the main one is Torvald sacking Krogstad sets things in motion that can't be undone. Okay, in order for all this to happen quickly, Ibsen had to sacrifice realism. Yeah, well, personally, as a viewer or as a reader, I think we can suspend realism very easily, but some people like realism. They want things to be realistic. So what we mean by sacrificing realism here is Krogstad repeats the terms of the loan to Nora. He goes over them to her, which is not realistic because Nora would have already known them. She would have known the terms of the loan. She didn't need to hear them again. But Ibsen did this because the audience were unaware. The audience didn't know the terms of the loan. The audience weren't aware of how Nora came about to get this loan or what happened in order to get the loan. So repeating things like that was designed to speak to the audience as opposed to repeating to Nora. It wasn't that she was stupid and had to be reminded. So that's not realistic that he would do that, but it was done for a specific reason. Okay, Mrs. Lind is also introduced as a device to allow Nora to tell her backstory, which is central to the action of the play. It also serves the purpose of contrasting our initial opinion of Nora with the real Nora. So, when we first met Nora, we thought she was this subservient housewife who just basically would never have gone against her husband in any way, bar the odd macaroon hiding. But we see that she has taken out a loan against his wishes, and she tells Mrs. Lind this. If Mrs. Lind hadn't come into the story, we would not have been in a position to know this. Okay, so Nora, the author or the playwright needed an excuse for Nora to tell her backstory. Bringing in an old friend who hadn't seen her in a couple of years was the perfect way to do this. So if you think about it, everything the author or the playwright did was a technique in order to bring the story forward, okay? Continuing with the plot narrative pattern, the climax in the play takes place in the second act when Krogstad leaves the letter in the letterbox revealing the details of the loan. Okay, so, and I suppose there's a sense of drama there too, that the letter is in the letterbox, she knows it's in the letterbox, but she can't get to it because it's locked, okay, and it builds the suspense in the play and it creates real drama. Okay, and then that's what the playwright set out to do. And if you can imagine sitting in the audience not knowing the story for the first time, you would have been on the edge of your seat wondering what was going to happen. And that's what we call compelling storylines, okay? So that's what keeps the audience entertained. Okay, the surprising twist in the play is that there's no reconciliation between Nora and Torvald at the end of the play, which caused a lot of controversy at the time. You have to remember the time that it was written, I think it was 1879. The patriarchal society, that very, very staunch Victorian upbringing that the people would have had. So Nora closing the door on her life as a mother and a wife did not go down well across the world. In Germany, the ending was altered so that Nora did not leave at the insistence of the woman playing Nora. So the woman who was cast as to play Nora said, "I can't go ahead with this. This can't happen. A woman could never walk out on her children and her husband." So they changed it. Now, look at Ibsen's reaction. We talked about it in cultural context already. But Ibsen described this as a barbaric outrage. It should be noted that this shows just how powerful and shocking the ending was at the time. Okay, and if you think about it in modern terms, I think it was Mrs. Brown's Boys was to be aired in, I think it was somewhere in Eastern Europe, and one of the characters who was gay, they decided that they were going to have him as a straight character, a heterosexual character. And Brendan O'Carroll was outraged at this because he said he's gay. That's in the show, he's gay, therefore he cannot be. So writers want their story told, and I know that you can't be comparing Mrs. Brown's Boys with Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, but it just shows a similar story. The cultural context of these societies were being challenged by these plays, and being homosexual in Eastern Europe in some of those places is still frowned upon. So plays like this, like Ibsen's A Doll's House, challenged mindsets, and a lot of people don't want their societies and mindsets challenged. So Ibsen was outraged at this, but it shows how powerful that the ending was, that a woman was able to stand up to a man and walk out the door. Now, imagery and symbolism, really important part of literary genre, and one you'll probably use in your question that you have on compelling storylines. Okay, the title of the play refers to the most important symbol in the text, which is a doll's house. Helmer treats his wife like a plaything, and she treats the children the same way. So it's easy to blame Helmer and put everything on him, but Helmer's only representative of the society in which he lives in, and Nora also is to blame as well. She treats her children the same way as Helmer treats her. She calls her daughter her sweet little baby doll, and tells them later that dogs don't bite nice little dolly children. So it's constantly reinforcing this idea that children are dolls, and when they grow up, boys will grow up to become men, girls will grow up to become dolls, doll wives for husbands. Okay. Significantly, Nora buys her daughter a cheap doll and accessories, as she says she will soon break them into pieces. And this foreshadows Nora's breaking up with the family. So foreshadowing is a technique used, you'll remember that even from junior cert. Foreshadow is a technique but used by all writers to hint that something is about to happen. And it keeps the readers on the edge of their seat. It keeps novel readers turning pages. It keeps film viewers to keep viewing, okay? At the end of the play, she tells us she has been Torvald's doll wife, just as she had been her father's doll child. So the doll in the doll's house is very symbolic and full of imagery there. Okay, the Christmas tree symbolises Nora's desire to create a beautiful and happy home by creating something that beautiful and that is beautiful and decorative. So at the beginning of the play, she's constantly trying to make the house look beautiful. She believes that making the house look beautiful and decorative will make her family beautiful, okay, and make the family home beautiful. Okay, so it's again that appearance versus reality, that doesn't matter what's going on inside the house, it must look beautiful to the outside world. However, at the start of Act 2, we are told the tree is now stripped off its ornaments and with burned down candles' ends on its dishevelled branches. This foreshadows the disintegration of the Helmer family. So the Christmas tree, the disintegration of the Christmas tree throughout the play shows the disintegration of the family unit itself. The tarantella and the macaroons both symbolise a side of Nora that she cannot openly express. So Nora has a sweet tooth. She wants to eat macaroons. She loves them, but she can't do it because it goes against what Torvald wants her to do. She also loves performing the tarantella, but Torvald he only allows this in certain situations. So he dictates how she expresses herself as a person, and they symbolise things that she must hide about herself. The tarantella shows us Nora's wild, passionate side, which is at odds with her childlike, demure, outward appearance. Torvald, while finding her dancing highly desirable, pretends they are not married when out in public. Torvald can only accept the sexualised version of Nora if it is separate from his wife and mother of his children. Okay, so this sexualised version of Nora, he loves it, but he doesn't want to see that as his wife. He often pretends they're just engaged or that they're having an affair. So he plays this role play where he pretends they're not married. So he can't put together the sexualized version of Nora with the mother of his children. He must keep them separate at all times. Okay, and the last one we're going to come to is an imagery and symbolism is the door. The door is highly symbolic at the end of the play. Nora walks through the door, signaling her exit from the dollhouse, entering into the real world for the first time, leaving Torvald in the only world he really understands. This can be viewed in two ways. Nora is walking out the door and slamming it shut, or she is walking towards a new life. And just as a kind of and what you have to do in the comparative is to compare it to other texts. Look at Eilish in Brooklyn when she walks towards the blinding light, leaving the dreary world of 1950s Ireland behind. Now, it's very different for Eilish. She was leaving her mother and sister behind. Nora's leaving, and which was quite acceptable. Nora is leaving her children and her husband behind. Okay? So, thank you for listening, and if you like today's content, please hit like. Also, subscribe if you want more Leave Insert English content, which will be uploaded in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.